I'm going to start. So hi, hello. This is Beth Billings with Around the Table Yarns, and today we are doing the To the Moon and Back sock by Megan Williams. And I'm going to pin and spotlight for everyone, and we're going to go to the video. And I'm going to show you how to cast on. And we'll talk about the pattern and what all is going on here. Okay.
Yeah, I need that.
You need to see how to cast on again?
Oh yeah.
Okay, this pattern is called To the Moon and Back by Megan Williams. It is a paid pattern. I don't remember how much it was. Was it $6 or $8? The nice thing about it is a toe up sock. A benefit is that it is sized to fit any foot from toddler, child up to an extra large adult. So that's kind of a nice range for a sock to give you, because if you are doing it by your gauge, it gives you a lot of options for a sock that will fit you depending on the gauge that you get. Or if you get exactly the gauge that the sock is written for, then you have a lot of options of sizes to make for other people as well as for yourself. So I'm always happy when there's a nice range of sizes, because I think it makes the pattern much more useful. There's the photograph of it, and I have my my sock that I've started. So I'm going to demonstrate on a bigger needle with bigger yarn, but I've started with Tara Mitchell's Creations, and in the honey color. And I'm not sure why it's doing this kind of loopy over thing, but I feel like once my toe is in it, that's not that, or it's blocked, that's not going to be coming over quite so hard. But this sock has a cabled front, and then it starts to have these clocked or circular motifs of the moon, and those motifs will move across the cabling, across the sock in a repetitive manner. And so we're going to talk first about the toe up cast on, and then the increases for the shaping of the toe are done with yarn overs and then knitting through the back of the loop. And I'll demonstrate both of those things today. And then we're going to discuss reading the chart for the cabling pattern and reading the cable instructions. And that's as far as we're going to go today. And then our second class is next month in June. And we will be covering the whole of the heel and finishing the sock in that class. So I know Kathy, I think, is ready for her heel, but or spoke very highly of the heel and how much she enjoyed doing the heel and how nice and roomy it is. And that's especially important if you have a high arch or an unusually hard time getting into hand knitted socks. Having a bigger heel makes it much more comfortable to get in and out of them. Okay, so that's the pattern. And I'm going to put mine away just for a minute. And we're going to go over Judy's Magic Cast On. And we've done this before. I'm hoping this yarn is a good visibility for the video. Try and lift it up a little bit higher. So I want you to, those of you who are following along at home with your pattern, I am going to talk a little bit about this pattern and reading it and making sense of it, because I actually found it a little confusing at first when I picked it up. So she gives an overview on page 3. The designer, Megan Williams, gives an overview of the pattern. And she says that it's written for 2 circular needles or you can do it magic loop or on double pointed needles, but you need to be very clear for yourself what is the top and what is the bottom. So with magic loop, it's harder to identify the top and the bottom without a marker or without something that helps you sort of see it. But luckily if you choose to do the patterned toe versus the plain toe, you start off in the pattern right away. So for example, here, there's only a couple of rows where it is exactly the same at the bottom, where it's just stockinette, and then you immediately go into the patterning. So if you think you might have an issue telling the top from the bottom of your sock, I suggest that you do the patterned toe, and that will introduce you to the pattern of the cabling right away, and it will help you keep track of what is the top of your sock, and the bottom of the sock is just plain stockinette, as it were. So that's the first thing I wanted you to be aware of. I'm assuming that you're choosing your sizes, and having done a gauge swatch and understanding the relationship of gauge to the size of your sock. So we're not covering that today, but there are videos about that back in January. When you start reading the pattern, then what I have done is, and I'm just gonna sort of hold this up, I've used my marker to say which part of the pattern I'm doing. So for example, this pattern has all of these different sizes and all of these different charts. And so on a page, I may have that many charts, and on this page, I have that many charts. And so I've crossed off everything but the one I'm doing. And again, I don't want to show too much because this is somebody's pattern, and it's paid for, and I don't want to show it on the video, but I've indicated with a marker on my pattern to say this is the chart that I am on, so that if I put it down for 2 weeks and pick it back up again like I did, I'll know exactly where to go for the beginning of the chart. So I highly suggest that you use a pen or pencil and make a note on your pattern, either if you're doing it on your iPad or doing it on paper, but make a note where you are. This is one of the times that I highly recommend printing out your pattern so you can scribble all over it for this particular project. You know, when we have our patterns on our devices, it can sometimes be, it's very handy, but I hate it.
Yeah.
I'm always afraid that my computer is going to die, or my phone is too little, and my iPad is going to die. Somebody's always borrowed it and used up all the battery life. And so I'm just happier with a paper pattern. So I like to mark up all over my paper patterns. But if you keep your iPad nice and charged and you use your Knit Companion or whatever, you can do the same thing by making a note at the top. This next thing is that this is a symmetric pair of socks. There's a left sock and a right sock. So you need to keep track of which one you're doing. You can pick either one. I'm starting with the left one because it's on the left and I'm from a Western country, and so I'm doing the left sock, but you could start with the right one. That was all I had to say about that. So now we're going to do the Judy's Magic Cast On. So my size, I cast on the adult medium, and I'm going to use the example of the toddler though for the demonstration. And so that's going to be 10 stitches per needle. So I have my tail in front of me, and I'm going to do magic loop. So I'm going to orient my needles facing to the left. And now I want a darker background. Hold please while we get a darker background. Okay, so I'm orienting my needles facing to the left. There. And I'm going to drop the tail between the needles and lay the working yarn over what I call the far needle. So if I'm here this way, if I'm in that direction, then the needle that's the furthest from me is the one that I want the working yarn to go over. So here's my tail. Here's my farther needle. Here's my working yarn. So this is the yarn that's attached to the ball. And I don't want it to get messed up on the cable. I just want it to be laying over the top needle. And I'm holding them a little bit apart. Now, the tail, I'm going to move away from me and cross it with the working yarn. So do you see the loop that I just formed there? I'm going to make that loop as though I were doing a shotgun long tail cast on. Okay. So again, this is the tail. It's coming through the center. I'm moving it towards the back and pulling the working yarn towards me to cross the tail and the working yarn on the top needle. Okay, so now I want 10 stitches total on each needle. I already have the first on the top needle. So the first stitch is made by that cross. The second stitch is made in the way that the rest of the stitches will be made, by wrapping in what's sort of like a figure 8 pattern around the needles. Now, my pointer finger is always going to be the one that feeds the bottom needle, and my thumb is always going to be the one that feeds the top needle. Okay, so I think of it as the far finger and the near needle. These are the two together, and then the near finger and the far needle. And so keep that in mind. So I want to do this needle. Sorry, they're getting a little far apart. This needle. So I want to bring the far yarn and I go from the bottom of the needle into the middle. Then I take my thumb, which is the near finger, over the far needle from the center over the back. And then you stay back in position. You resume the normal position. So you can turn the needles so that your far finger goes over the near needle, and then turn so that the near yarn goes over the top needle, the far needle. And then they start to stick together. Okay, so turn top pointer yarn over the bottom needle, thumb yarn from the center over the top needle. Now that is different than some books describe how Judy's Magic Cast-On is done. Most books describe going into the center. So you would do the top needle into the center and then the bottom needle in the opposite direction into the center. And the reason I don't is because if you wrap it in this direction, you won't have to reposition those stitches in the first row.
Mhm.
And that makes life easier. So they're getting closer together. I'm going to hold it a little bit more parallel so that the points aren't coming together. And I'm going to move it down a little bit, but I'm still moving the stitches. That goes to the bottom. And from the middle and over the top. Over the middle, over the top.
Okay. to the middle and to the top. To the middle and to the top. Okay.
And then you should end with a bottom needle being fed with the tail. Okay, and then you should have the correct number of stitches on both needles. It started here and then here. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 4, 6, 8, 10. So if I turn it over, it kind of looks loose. So I'm going to retwist those two yarns, and then I'm going to turn them like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. I'm going to turn them to face the other direction. So I've twisted the yarns again. I'm going to take the bottom needle out to work the stitch on the top needle now. So this was the bottom needle, and in rotating it, it's become the top needle. And now the top needle is on the bottom. That's the one I'm going to move, and I'm going to go into this first stitch. It is only by holding the yarn twisted that they're in place, but once you make that stitch, you can tighten up. You can snug that up. And you're just going to knit across the first row.
Yeah.
So make the first stitch and give it a little tug, both yarns, the tail and the working yarn, give them both a little tug, and it will snug up that first stitch. And I think that's what I did wrong on my first sock, because I have a hole in the corner. So I think I didn't snug it up enough. So please snug. Okay, and I knit it across to the end. It is magic because it's just a twisted yarn. It's just a twisted loop of yarn, but it makes a row. Okay, so I drop the needle that I worked the stitches off of. I make the sunrise again and set in the west. I take the loose needle and position it back into the stitches. These are the stitches that have not yet been worked. They're now on the top. I remove, the tail is now on the opposite side. Keep that out of your way. I remove the bottom needle and I turn it to, so I still have the loop on the other side, or if you're using 2 needles. You do need to start this on circular needles, even if you're going to use double points. So you do need to have 1 or 2 circular needles to start this. Otherwise it doesn't work because you need the cable to be flexible. And then I'm knitting across those stitches. So that is Judy's Magic Cast On, done with the alteration of the technique that allows you to do this row. It's this row that's affected, and it's not twisted. So you can see there's no twisted stitches across the front. And that's the thing that makes this such a great cast on. It's very quick. If you can memorize that, if you can find a way to memorize the far needle and the near yarn, or however you want to call it, however you want to describe it to yourself, near and far is what I use. But if you can memorize that, it is such an easy way to start toe up socks, and it gives such a nice tidy edge for the beginning of that toe box. So I just really like it. Okay, I'm going to refer to my pattern briefly so I don't make a mistake. 1, 2. So in the pattern, it tells you then to work. I know we do the first. Okay, you cast on and knit all the stitches on both needles. So we've done the setup round. So now I'm going to turn it and I'm going to knit the toe. So she talks about knitting the toe for your size according to the chart. if we're doing the patterned toe. So you start the patterning on the first needle, and on the second needle, hold on one sec. Okay, so we've turned over to the other side, and now we're going to start row 1 of the patterning, and that is going to be setting up, I believe, setting up for the cables. So it's pretty straightforward. We're just going to be, I think, essentially ribbing in the, oh, no, it's actually just a plain knit row in the first round. So I'm looking at the left sock, and I'm going to do the yarn over that starts this. Oh, there we go. The yarn over beginning. So this can be a little bit confusing for people. Like, what do you mean a yarn over? There's nothing, you know, you're not there yet. So the yarn over beginning is literally just picking up the.
Oh, doesn't she first?
Sorry?
Isn't there one knit first and then yarn over?
Oh, it is a knit 1 yarn over. Hello. Thank you, Elfrida.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, so it's even easier.
Yeah.
You knit the first stitch, give it a little bit of a tug. Again, you want to keep it from being too loose at the edges. Knit the first stitch, bring the yarn forward, that's your yarn over, and then knit the next stitch. So now you've added a stitch very loosely in between 1 and 2. And then you're going to do that again at the end of the row, the end of this side of the row, yarn forward over the needle. So again, the yarn is in back for a knit stitch. You bring it forward as though to purl, and you lay it over the right hand needle before you knit the last stitch. And that happens the same whether you are a left-handed or a continental knitter or a thrower. And I'm going to turn it. We're going to do the same thing on the back. The back is always in stockinette, so it's always knitted. So far there's no difference between them. You just have to keep track of these 2 rows to start. So now I'm knitting 1, bringing the yarn forward and knitting another 1. Working to the end of the row so that between the last and the second to last stitch, I add another yarn over. Okay. So that's the yarn over increase. Now, the setup for the chart. Has anybody not read a chart before? Is everybody comfortable with chart reading?
There's one here. I have never seen the left purl cross before.
The left purl cross.
Is it over 2 or
It's over 2.
Oh,
It's over 2. So you're taking a knit stitch to the left. I'll talk about that in a second.
okay.
So now I've done 1 round, and I've done the yarn over increase on each edge of both sides. So when I begin this round, it starts again with a knit stitch, and then I have my yarn over. And instead of knitting into the front of the yarn over, which leaves a big eyelet opening, I'm going to knit into the back of the yarn over, which creates essentially a make one left.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to purl to follow the pattern. And then I'm going to knit to follow the pattern. And then I'm going to purl again to follow the chart pattern. And I come at the end of those purl stitches, I come to my second eyelet stitch. I knit again into the back of it. Now, sometimes it's hard, especially at the end of the row, especially when you're pulling, it's hard to get into the back of that leg. And so I take my needle and I go into the front of the leg and I reverse the positions. I kind of swirl it over the other needle. And that's, I find, the easiest way for me to get into the back of that stitch. And then you knit into the back of that stitch. It is also the same as a make one left. So these are not symmetric. You could, if you really felt strongly about those not being symmetric, you could reverse them and do something differently with the first one, particularly to make it be a make one right. But I don't think it matters. I think a symmetric cross on a tiny little stitch, remember these are much bigger needles and much bigger yarn than what you would normally be using. And then the last stitch is knitted. I better be right about that. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Yeah. Okay. So here we go again. We've now done the front. Sorry, we've done the front. Now we're going to do the back. And as I said before, the back is only, oh, these are not good needles. They do not have a good join. They are something from my past. So I'm going to knit the first stitch and then I'm going to make sure that I knit into the back of the second stitch and then knit across. And I'm pretty aggressively pulling up on my edges because you're beginning to work in the round now. And I feel like it needs a little bit of extra tension to get those edges nice and closed. So again, I'm doing that technique where I kind of swirl it around to the back to get into the back leg of that stitch. And then there's my last stitch. So now both needles have 2 more stitches than they started with. And when I turn, I have visible stitch work to follow. I have visible purl stitches to follow. So I don't need to place a marker if I do the patterned toe. If you aren't doing the patterned toe, if you're doing a plain toe, you're going to want to put a marker at the beginning or in the middle even of the stitches so that when you come to that side, you have a visual reminder to begin patterning. Does anybody have any questions about the cast on, the increase, the knitting through the back of the loop, or reading the chart?
No, I started with the plain toe just for practice. But I think when I decide to do pattern, I think at that point I decide which side I'm going to use for the top because they're both the same, right?
They're both the same. Yes. And actually, the only difference in the toes, in the patterning at the beginning in the toes, is if it's a left or a right cross on the cable.
I hadn't even looked at that. Yeah.
So they are quite symmetric in that way.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Okay. So I hope that that helps with the very beginning of your sock. You repeat your increases and she has a chart at the bottom of the page on whichever page you're doing, the toddler through adult small or the adult medium through extra large. And in the bottom right-hand corner is a toe stitch count. So she tells you how many total stitches you start with and how many total stitches you end with. And after receiving a cease and desist letter from another designer, I can't tell you what those numbers are. You have to look at your own page. So the next thing I want to talk about is the chart symbols. And because I don't think that those are proprietary, I'm going to go ahead and show them on video. So those are the chart symbols. Okay. So if the square has a line in it, it's a purl. If it's blank, it's knit. If there's a circle, it's a yarn over. If there's a twist, that's what that little thing is, then it says KTBL, knit through back loop, which we just demonstrated. The left cross and the right cross, and then there's a left purl cross and a right purl cross, and then they have no stitch. So for example, I will show you this because it's just the adult medium toe. So as Elfrida pointed out, there is a knit stitch at the beginning of each row. Let's see if I can make that look more shady. It's hard to see the shade there.
Yeah.
But there's a white stitch. This is sort of pale gray. So this is where there's no stitches. You start with this many and you increase this many times till you get to the finish of the toe. These marks are from there. And so they're all left crosses. So the left foot has all left crosses on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it increases out. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total on the adult medium by the time you get to the top of the toe.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm reading the chart always from the right side to the left side. It is symmetric, but I'm always reading it from the right side because I am working in the round. Any questions about that?
Mm-hmm.
All right, I recommend, this is I'm holding it up and it is blown up on your screen. This is what it looks like on the page. It's quite a small chart. I recommend that you consider using a highlighter or highlighter tape or blowing up your chart with your printer or your copier, because it's harder to see. And one of the things that was harder to see is what Elfrida brought up before. So it is just a 2-stitch cable, which means if you want to do a cable without a cable needle, and I'm going to demonstrate that, you can do that. And these, I think the old fashioned term for them is clocks. People used to have clocked stockings where they had these circles on the stocking because they look like little clock faces. But what's interesting about it, it starts with just a left cross between my fingernails. It's hard to see because it's tiny, but there's just a left cross there. And then it goes right out into this circle. And that's by passing 1 stitch over 2 purl stitches to the right, and then 1 stitch over 2 purl stitches to the left. And then you work in pattern and then you bring it back in and then they cross again. So I'd like to demonstrate that on my sample without having made it to the top of my increases, if that's okay.
Yeah, I need
Because I'd like you to see that. I'd like you to pay attention to the fact that this is only a 2-stitch cable between my thumbs, but that this is a 2-stitch cable that becomes 6 stitches in the next moment. And so it's just a little nuance. It's not that tricky to do. It's not that difficult, but it's a little nuance. I actually started this row. It's been a couple of weeks since I worked this one. And then today I was doing these 2 up here because there's 2 next to each other. And I was like, they weren't next to each other when I finished the row before or the row 2 before. And I realized it's because I didn't look closely enough at the chart and I didn't realize that it was involving 3 stitches. I just worked it over 2. So let's just do that to demonstrate. So I'm going to follow a row in the chart from the leg. There's no, except for the the 1x1 cables, there's no cabling in the toe. These happen later on. So let's just, with the toddler, I'm going to move my yarn back into the middle. And I'm not going to do any more increases. I'm going to pretend that I've done all the ones I'm supposed to do, but I'm just going to work with that center cable and show you the two different cables that you're going to be doing. So there's going to be these purl stitches. So I actually very much like to do a no cable needle cable when there's only 2 stitches. And this is a left cross. So this stitch should cross over that one. So the left hand stitch is going to cross in front of the right hand stitch. And the way to do that is to take your right needle tip and insert it between the stitches and into knitwise into the stitch that's to the left. And then you can pop that one stitch off and catch it quickly on your left hand needle.
Mm-hmm.
If your yarn is already in back, then you just need to pick up the front of that stitch and knit it, and knit the stitch you just moved, and then you're done.
I thought it's a purl.
This is the 2 stitch cross.
Oh,
this
yeah.
is just the left cross to start with.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay. So I just want to demonstrate that it's a little bit different for the right cross. So on the back of this one, I'm going to do a right cross. No good comes of that. Having a bad join. Okay, so let's go to the center of this one. Pretend that this is also a patterned one. So here I am. I want the stitch on the left to cross in front of the stitch on the right, which means that if they were sitting next to each other, the first stitch goes behind the second one. So when that's the case, I want to move my yarn to the back. I want to go knitwise into the first stitch, or the stitch that's 2 from the end of the needle. Again, if you pop it off, you just grab that stitch from behind. And now they're crossed.
Yeah.
It's much easier than finding that stupid cable needle. And so then that looks like that. And that's the right hand cross. And so we'll make that be in pattern. Now, the clock, the circle, the moon happens immediately over that cross. So there's not a second row in between. It happened. Oh,
no.
Bit my tongue. There is a second row. I reversed the tape. Really, I should read ahead. So we'll just, talk amongst yourselves while I work that second row. So the idea is the second row gives you a little bit more shaping, I believe, in a cable. It makes it look not so squat, and it sort of brings the cable that you just did into clearer focus on your pattern. It makes it look better. Here's my back stitches. And again, I'm finding that as I'm working in the round, I'm needing to really give a little bit of a tug at the beginning of each row to close up the edges. So there's my right cross, and I'm just going to knit across those 2 stitches. And now it's a little bit clearer that there's a right cross there. We'll look at it more closely the next time. Hold on. I just want to demonstrate these 2 figures. So also place a lifeline, says Karen Conley. It's not a bad idea. So in that blank row that you're knitting in between, you could put in a lifeline. And especially with socks, which are so small and hard to put back on the needles, that can be very helpful. Okay, so here I am. I've done 1 row in between. Oh. And you can see the cross more clearly. You can see those crossed stitches. And so now I'm going to make the circle. So I'm going to knit 2, and then this stitch here where my thumb is going to move 2 stitches over, and it's going to be here after this first purl stitch. So I'm going to purl 1, and then it's just a little bit trickier. It has to come in front. So I'm going to put my needle, but I'm going to take my yarn to the back ready to knit, because the next stitch I knit is going to be this knit stitch. I'm going to put my needle into that and slide it off, and then catch those 2 purl stitches with the tip. So my finger is there kind of preventing them from running or doing anything, and I do it very quickly. So they are briefly off the needle and then right back on. Okay, and then you kind of have to pull that stitch over to get into it to make the knit stitch, and now bring the yarn forward. You pull into those 2 that we moved, and now it's time to do the other half. You'll still be purling.
Okay.
So this stitch here needs to move 2 stitches over and land here. It needs to go in front. So you'll be purling this stitch next. So I go into these 2 stitches purlwise. And that one pops out in front. I just slide my left needle in to catch it. And then if you want to, you can slide these 2 stitches back on to the left needle and go ahead and work them. It feels a little convoluted doing this, and they bunch up on each other. And that's happening maybe because of the size of the needles and yarn that I'm using. At the end of it, it looks very strained and pulled apart. But again, the row that we do in between helps to relax all of that. So there's that first clock done. Okay. So just for speed, I'm going to purl back to show you what happens to it. You're always going to stay in pattern. So you would follow whether it was a knit or a purl stitch on the front. And what you've done is you've created a figure that has a knit stitch on the outside and 4 purl stitches on the inside.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Okay, so then when I turn it, it looks more like the bottom of a circle there.
Yeah.
And so that's the figure that they're creating with this. So it looks a little bit pointed. It's like a round with a little bit of a point on each end. But that will go on to these figures here. So there's 1, and then there's 2, and then there's 2 here. and they travel across. So this is a traveling rib. So these ribs stay the same, but the moon figures travel across or move across. So pretty straightforward to do.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions about how to do the cabling?
I think for those, I will use a needle.
For
Just-
those for the moon ones, you want to use a
Yeah,
cable needle?
I
The
think
only problem I have is that cable needles are universally dull.
I don't use a cable needle.
Yeah, so if you're gonna do
I
them,
use a double.
use a double point.
Yeah,
A short or a long double point, you can maneuver it around, but a double
Yeah.
point is going to be a better tool for those.
yeah.
And just be careful with them. This is
It-
not, we were having a conversation about it. There was one person in sock club this morning, and she's about to go on a trip, and she said, this is not airplane knitting.
No.
And I agree. This is not car knitting. This is not airplane knitting. The cables are with sock yarn and small needles. The
Oh,
cables
yeah.
are a little bit finicky. If you are doing it on size 1.5 or smaller, I highly recommend you have the smoothest join possible if you're using a circular needle.
Yeah.
But I think pointy tips and a smooth join. So my recommendation is first the ChowGoo metal lace tips.
Mini. Yeah.
And then my second recommendation would be the bamboo from ChowGoo. I just find the finish on the ChowGoo joins, if you're using a circular needle, is better. If you're using double points, the ChowGoo bamboo double points are definitely sharper than the zings. So a sharper tip. Other sharp tip companies are like Haya or Signature. They have a lace tip as well. Addie also sells a lace tip. But Clover tend to be very dull. Zings tend to be very dull. Knitter's Pride, the wooden ones are very sharp, but the zings have a blunt tip. Okay, so the next part, I'm going to just quickly go over the next part of the expectations for next time. And you are supposed to fit, so the toe shaping is this part here. You get to the widest part, and then you start the patterning if you're doing the patterning, and it's okay if you're not. And that goes on. And then you continue with this without any further shaping, no further increasing or decreasing. So you're patterning only on the top of the foot, the bottom of the foot remains in stockinette. And that goes on until you are 1 inch from the total length of your foot. So remember, the total length of the finished foot is 10% shorter than the total length of your actual foot. So don't continue to 1 inch shorter than your actual foot. Measure your foot, do the math, multiply it by 0.9, and then subtract 1 inch. So if your foot is 10 inches long, multiply it by 0.9 gives you 9 inches, and then subtract a foot you would knit to 8 inches, not to 9 inches.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. I say that because Elfrida, who has
Makes
made
it too
many
long.
socks,
I always make them too long.
sometimes forgets that we're doing it with negative ease. Negative ease means fewer rows than your actual length, so that your foot stretches the sock out and it fits better. A sock that doesn't move in your shoe is more comfortable and will wear longer than a sock that is too big. So please pay attention to that. I recommend measuring your foot and measuring your row gauge and double checking those things. We're going to work until the the end of the foot. So that's 1 inch less than your desired foot length, which again should be 10% less than your actual foot length.
No, I haven't worked that much, but the pattern ends, oh, what is it, 60?
The pattern is supposed to be repeated.
Oh, okay.
So you go back to the beginning. If you have to keep going,
Yeah.
it's worked the circles all the way over to the other side. And so then you would just pick them up again.
Okay.
At row 1.
Yeah.
So the pattern is written with a row repeat as well. Well, there's no repeat of the pattern because there's not that many stitches. Okay, so you keep going till the end of the foot and then you stop, and then we will be doing the spacious oh my gosh heel.
Okay.
Which looks like that. And I'm looking forward to it too. And then it's going to be back into pattern for the top of the sock. I'm not sure if it's not all the way around the sock at the top. So that's for next time. That instruction will be for next time. And then we'll also cover doing the doing a stretchy bind off. And maybe we'll have a new stretchy bind off to learn for that one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good. Yeah.
Any thoughts, comments, questions? You guys are so good. I'm going to stop the recording here, and we will be posting this to our webpage.